Right, hello folks, welcome back. Chapter 22, Journey to Jerusalem. For nearly 3.5 years now, death and destruction had become a way of life throughout the entire world. More lives have been lost in violent deaths during that period than in all the wars throughout history. In Britain, cities like Swansea and Plymouth had been virtually washed off the map by big waves. Cities like Liverpool had suffered great damage and loss of life. Britain had done a better job of rebuilding than other countries, which had also been severely damaged by the waves. But that did not say much in itself. Disposing of all the bloated bodies had become the first priority. Reconstruction was largely put on hold. Deserted coastal towns were popular haunts for the tribulation force, who found shelter and escape from public exposure by squatting in them. They were able to fish for sustenance, even if they could not find discarded food as easy as they could in the big cities. The United Nations had declared England to be an international country. The United Nations had declared England to be an international country shortly after the fall of America, which effectively meant that it was under strict UN control. UN troops enforced conformity with all of its official policies. So much for Brexit, eh? Like I'm telling you, like it's happening already. Like I've been telling you these things, but people want proof. Like it's just there in your face. What do you want? You want documents. You want somebody to come out and tell you. It's just wool over your eyes. It's the lies, the lies, the lies. Like Morpheus said, what is real? But you guys are just too drunk on the Babylonian wine to see anything, to know anything, to admit anything. And as I said before, all these affordable homes that are going up. I'm telling you, like this is England will be an international country. UN troops enforced conformity. This he's telling you about it 22 years ago. UN policies were always determined by General Secretary Lee Vaju Dang Chao. England had lost a further 10 million people to the UN executions. All of this had the effect of numbing people to the full impact of death. For those who chose to follow Deng Chao, it meant that they had hardened their hearts, even to the cries of children and babies being cruelly and callously murdered when their own loved ones were lost. They only became more angry with God. You see, that's why, because they're going to be crying out, oh, why don't God save us? Why don't God do nothing? Why don't God step in? Blah, 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 blah. And you spent all your life ignoring him. And also you're going to blame the Christians. Oh, they brought this on. They did this. They did this. They did this. Numbness for the Christians meant that they lived with a constant appreciation of eternal values, something they had not given much thought to in the days when life had been easier. Death, especially such a quick one as performed by the guillotine, was an express ticket to heaven. There was no future for them on earth, apart from getting others to join in their dramatic statement of faith in God and rejection of all that Dan Chao's regime stood for. But it was still as though everyone, good and bad alike, was living in a constant state of shock. I wouldn't say shock, I'd say the cognitive dissonance. Definitely. People just don't want to admit it. Oh, it's for the best. Oh, they must know what they're doing. Oh, we must leave it into the hands of the authorities. They know what's best for us. They have our best interests at heart. And those Christians, they must have done something. Why didn't they just take the mark? Why don't they just take the mark? Why do they have to make things difficult? Those Christians, they must have done something. When we're just being rounded up and murdered and killed and taken to the guillotine, oh, they must have done something, you know. They will make excuses. Oh, he did this, he did that. Especially with the saddest thing about the executions were the children. Parents would often have to hold their babies in the neck groove at the bottom of the death machine because the gap was too big for their tiny heads. The children, of course, had not yet received the mark. So it's talking about parents, basically. Christian parents who refuse to take the mark. Their family, the whole family is at the guillotine now. And the parents know once that chip is inside their child, that's it. So now the parents are actually placing their child's head in the guillotine. The children, of course, had not yet received the mark, but the rules were that all orphans of the tribulation force were to be forcibly given the mark and then raised in government orphanages. The authorities really did not want the responsibility for so many babies and children, but they took an evil delight in forcing parents to make the choice themselves about whether to sacrifice their children to the authorities or to the guillotine. Most chose the guillotine. That's what we would like to think, but this is what I mean, guys, family and friends. It's these big decisions to make, you know. And if you can't even give up pork, you know, what makes you think you can do this? If you can't even keep the Sabbath, what makes you think you can do this? It really puts things into perspective, man. This is what faith and trust really looks like when things get real. Other children, those over 7, were allowed to make their own choice. Most chose to go with the authorities, and that caused more anguish for the tribulation force than did the guillotine. So you're 7, you don't understand. Of course you're not going to go to the guillotine unless your parents have been telling you about this. But still, you're 7 years old. The saints came to see the significance of a warning that Jesus had given, instructing believers to pray that they would not be pregnant or have small children in the period just before the Great Tribulation. I spoke about this before. Matthew 24:19 and 2 Esdras 16:44 I've written down here, just so it's clear, because he didn't put the scripture down. The saints came to see the significance of a warning that Jesus had given instruction to believers to pray that they would not be pregnant or have small children in the period just before the Great Tribulation. And that's Matthew 24:19. I've mentioned this before. It's seared on my brain. 2 Esdras 1644. Sexual activity did not cease altogether amongst the believers, but it did become much rarer than it had been before the trouble started. No one wanted to have a child in such awful times, and birth control was a luxury that few of the saints could afford. The crowded living conditions did not leave much opportunity for privacy either. Those facing execution had far more serious thoughts on their minds, and the 12 tribes had earlier adopted a policy of discouraging marriage and abandoning romantic alliances. If a couple wished to pursue a relationship, they were assigned to work duties together, always with chaperones present or nearby. If a decision was made to marry, it was made without any kissing or cuddling. A simple ceremony would be performed as soon as possible after a decision was made. Married couples in the 12 tribes were expected to put the cause above their relationship. They were often separated for long periods of time, but they only needed to remind themselves of how hard life was for the tribulation force to get things back into perspective. There were a few tribal members who fell away, but that only strengthened the resolve of those who remained. And there were physical casualties amongst the 12 tribes too, although not a single person who had refused the mark had been stung by the locusts. There were tribal members who had been caught during police raids when they were visiting or assisting the tribulation force. And there were 1 or 2 incidents where security had been breached and a whole base had been taken into custody. Death in such circumstances was inevitable, but authorities were more inclined to torture those who did not have the mark, believing that they had more information on where the leaders were located. Some had given in under torture, resulting in more arrests, but such defections were rare. New converts at the start of the final 3.5 years, ones who had not taken the mark, were enough to fill in for the losses in the 12 tribe members, so that with a year to go, they still numbered close to 144,000. But during that last year, their numbers dropped dramatically. They were all that remained of the holdouts, the only people on earth who had refused the mark, and even they were rapidly dying out. What happened to our protection? Chloe asked in an urgent email to her father Rayford, when Mary Teresa was shot and killed in a raid in Rome. Protection. Mary Teresa, she's the Catholic nun from the beginning, remember? One of the first members who came to see Rayford and was sat in the living room when he shouted and the big flash of light came. And remember, the dude was getting her, saying, you're a Catholic. Do you pray to Mary? Do you pray to Mary? So she's now dead. She's been shot in a raid in Rome. Protection is not absolute, Rayford had written to all of the tribes in response. God still lets his rain fall on the just and on the unjust. Any army that has ever won a war has still had its casualties, and we have to have them too. But look how far we've come. God is surely with us. The word survivor literally means one who lives above. Can we physically stay alive? We can physically stay alive, and that would be a form of survival. But there is an ever greater triumph that comes from facing the final enemy, death, and still coming out on top. The message of the resurrection is that death is not the end. It makes all the difference. As Paul the Apostle said, if there is no resurrection, then we, of all people, are most miserable. But because there is a resurrection, we will live on. Even after they have taken our lives, we will survive. We will live above it all. Nevertheless, every surviving member of the 12 tribes was counting down the days over those final months. When there were just 2 weeks to go, Rayford and Chaim felt it was time to head to Jerusalem. They both knew that it would end in their deaths, and so, when they bid farewell to their prospective co-workers, it was with heavy hearts. Irene surprisingly peaceful about Rayford's departure. In fact, she was the one who reminded him that they had had much more time together than most of the other couples they knew. Count the days, she said, as he pulled away from their final embrace. Count the days. The two witnesses left behind their computers, their only communication link with the rest of the 12 tribes. They took a change of clothes and a few toiletries, nothing more. Rayford was able to hitchhike the entire way, but Chaim needed to board a plane to get out of Australia. Chaim had never been married, and possibly because of that, he had a closer relationship with his co-workers. His tears flowed freely when he said goodbye to his colleagues. He was older than Rayford, with long brown hair and a beard that had grown of necessity when they ran out of razor blades. It just seemed natural to let my hair grow, he said. Chaim walked into Kingsford Smith Airport in Sydney, a warm Sunday afternoon in late November. He was not sure how he was going to get out of the country. He had no ticket, no passport, no visa, no money. Not even an identification. And most important, no mark. He got as far as the departure lounges with no incident. Australian immigration had ceased checking documents for departing passengers a few years earlier. Because, he has the mark, everything's on the mark, everything. He located a flight with El Al Airlines going to Tel Aviv via Bangkok. When passengers were called to board, Chaim took his place in the queue. A woman in front of him had a seizure of some sort, just as her ticket was being checked. While airline staff occupied themselves with her, Chaim slipped past the check-in desk and into the hallway that led to the plane. It was as easy as that. The flight was not heavily booked, so Chaim waited in the airplane's restroom till all other passengers were seated, and then took an unoccupied seat next to the aisle. The plane took off for Bangkok without incident. It reached its desired altitude and then leveled out. Chaim was thanking God for how smoothly it had all gone when the stewardess came and leaned over his seat. "We have no record of a passenger in this seat." "In this seat," she said quietly. "Have you moved from another seat?" "No, this is the only seat I've been in," Chaim responded, smiling up at the woman with a mischievous twinkle in his eye. "Can I see your pass?" the stewardess asked. "I'm afraid I don't have one," Chaim replied, still smiling. The stewardess looked concerned. "Can you show me your ticket?" "Truth is, I don't have a ticket either," Chaim answered sweetly. "Please wait here," the stewardess said, as she hurried off to get a second opinion before proceeding further. "I wonder where she thinks I'll go up here," Chaim thought to himself. as he waited. In the galley, Hattie, the stewardess, pulled David, the chief steward, out to where he could look down the aisle towards the rear of the plane. See that man in the middle aisle seat, about 6 rows back? Hattie whispered. He doesn't have a ticket. Really? said the steward, as if that explained everything. You see, I noticed him when he got on. Thought at the time that he looked that see, I noticed him when he got on. Thought at the time that he looked like one of those witness blokes. Did you see them on the telly? Oh yeah, Hattie said, as she studied Chaim's features. Chaim noticed the two staring at him, and he fluttered his fingers in a friendly wave. This should be interesting, David whispered, as he walked toward Chaim. As he walked towards where Chaim was sitting. You're one of those witness fellas, aren't you? David asked. I visited your website. He glanced at Hattie, who encouraged him by saying, no big deal, David. Everyone has seen it. Everyone has seen it. Thank you, said Chaim, who shook David's extended hand. So what are you doing on this plane? David asked. Flying to Tel Aviv. I have some business in Jerusalem. But you really need a ticket to fly. You must know that I can't buy a ticket without the mark. And I don't have the mark. I'll have to report this to my superiors, mate. They'll probably want us to turn back around and take you back to Sydney. Even if they agree to let you stay on, they'll have the cops waiting for you in Bangkok. You do realise that, don't you, mate? Don't you think God can get me to Jerusalem? Chaim asked as he looked up at David with his head tilted to one side. Well, I've heard the stories, and I sure don't want to piss you off, mate. He laughed. But certainly, you wouldn't do something dangerous here, mate. Not on the plane, would you? To tell the truth, Chaim said, as he indicated David to bend closer so he could hear a whisper. I really don't have much control over it. I only know moments before it happens. I figure that only God knows how much protection I need. Look, what I'll do is have a talk with the captain, and then I'll get back to you, the younger man replied. Thank you, Chaim smiled. And then he went back to reading the newspaper that he had been reading during takeoff. In the cockpit, there was a hurried exchange of information and then a call to Sydney. He says there could be a show of force, said the captain. Instructions came through that they should not do nothing to upset Chaim, and that they should proceed to Bangkok, where authorities would be notified. However, a zealous airline employee in Sydney phoned Israel too, and suggested that word be sent to the palace. By the time another snitch, By the time the plane touched down in Bangkok at 10 p.m. You see, they'll probably be offering like a purse for that, 30 pieces of silver for handing people over, bro. You know it, you just know it. We all saw it, like, during 2020 and 2021. We all saw it. By the time the plane touched down in Bangkok at 10 p.m. Local time, instructors had been changed. Chaim was to be kept on the plane for the midnight flight to Tel Aviv. A welcoming party was being arranged by the authorities at Ben Gurion Airport the following morning. Meanwhile, someone in Tel Aviv had leaked the story to the media. And the word on the TV was that Chaim had hijacked the plane. That's just so typical of the media, so typical of the press, like just sensationalizing everything, lies, and dramatizing everything. So everyone's going to switch on, everyone's going to buy a newspaper, everyone's going to be glued to their tellies, making him sound dangerous, a terrorist. Oh, terrorists, you know. Oh, come on, guys, man, your eyes must be open by now. Half of the reporters in Israel were at the airport, along with what looked like half of the UN's sizable military presence. When the plane finally touched down at Tel Aviv, it taxied to a domestic lounge which had been sealed off overnight. Chaim was then allowed to exit on his own before the plane proceeded to the international terminal with the other passengers. Chaim came through the door into the arrival lounge and blinked at the flashing lights and cameras and bright television lights. He waved to the press. And then the UN, an official came forward, trying to look all strong and for the sake of the cameras, and yet trying to look non-threatening for fear of Chaim's special powers. "I'm afraid that you're going to have to come with me," he said, as he braced for a reaction. "Certainly," Chaim responded. He was handcuffed and led to a police paddy wagon. He was then taken, not to the police station, but to the palace itself in Jerusalem. "So, at last, we meet," gloated Deng Chao as Chaim was led into the throne room. Everyone else bowed on the floor before the General Secretary, while Chaim remained standing strong. "Where is your partner?" Deng Chao asked. "I don't know," Chaim answered honestly. "Maybe I should hold you here for a few days and see if he turns up." Chaim did not respond. "We could have some fun with you at the temple," he said with an evil glint in his eye. "And God could have some fun with you," Chaim replied with a confidence that matched this of his captor. Deng Chao caught the seriousness of the threat and he eased back. "Only kidding," he said. "I just want to ask your friend some questions. We really need to work together for the good of the whole world. You see?" Again, Chaim remained silent. News reports stated that Chaim had been arrested and that he was being detained at the palace. Deng Chao was hopeful that it would be enough to attract Rayford. Excuse me. End of chapter. Zion Ben Jonah writes, of the Great Tribulation, Jesus promised that Christians would be betrayed and killed for their faith. Luke 21:16. And then he says in verse 18, "But there shall not a hair on your head perish." Apparently, of the Great Tribulation, Jesus promised that Christians would not be betrayed and killed for their faith. Luke 21:16. And then he says in verse 18, "But there shall not a hair on your head perish." The apparent contradiction is explained when we understand, as Rayford is quoted as saying in this chapter, that persecution is not absolute. We may die for our faith, but we will not perish. That is the essence of living above. There is no airtight guarantee that we will not suffer. In fact, indications are just the opposite. 2 Timothy 3:12. 2 Timothy 3:12. Yeah. So 2 Timothy 3:12 basically says, like, if you're living righteously, you will be persecuted. So that's just another indicator as well. Like, are you being persecuted at the moment? And as the Bible likes to talk about nations and whole groups of people, who has been getting persecuted? Obviously, the obvious, all throughout time, all throughout history, children of Israel. We have another group of people who claim to be Israel, and they tend to manufacture their persecution, or they get persecuted because of their nefarious deeds and their masters of deception and their corruption and their control. But also we have Christians on the other side of the world, in Asia, in India, in Sri Lanka, in various countries in Africa, who are getting persecuted for their faith. But European wise, ask yourselves, have you been getting persecuted over all these decades? Have you been persecuted over all these centuries? Just asking. Ultimately, our protection will be spiritual and eternal, and not necessarily temporal. This is why a tribulation vision is so important for all believers in every age. When we stop trying to escape discomfort and start to face even death itself, we will sort ourselves out spiritually. Life, for most of us today, has to do with more and more comforts, more and more luxuries, and less preparation for death. Now this next part I don't even want to read, because it's like, dude, what are you saying here? But I know humans are curious. You want to know what it says, even though it is wrong. You still want to know what it says. Okay. The Bible says of the world in Noah's day and in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah that they were just too busy getting married and raising families to think of the things of God. And it was because of that, and not specifically homosexuality or atheism, that God destroyed them. Luke 17:26-30. I'm gonna repeat that. The Bible says of in the days of Noah and in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah that they were just too busy getting married and raising families to think of the things of God, and it was because of that, and not specifically homosexuality or atheism, that God destroyed them. Luke 17:26-30. Even the two witnesses will have their limitations, as Chaim experiences in this chapter. I'm sorry, but that's exactly why the Most High destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's why he had to reset the whole world, as in the days of Noah. That's exactly why. We've all read it. Come on. We've all read it. So I hate when people do that. Like, he's just made light of why. What he's basically just said in that statement is that God came and destroyed them because they're not paying attention to God. Because they're eating and drinking and taking wives. No, that's not what... You could say that, but that's not why. And not specifically. And it was because of that, and not specifically homosexuality. And he's not killed everyone because they were eating and drinking and taking wives. What it's trying to explain to you is that destruction was on your doorstep, which is what's happening now, as in the days of Noah. That's why, if you read the whole thing, Luke 21, the disciples ask, "Oh, Master, Master, can you show us, tell us the days?" People want to know what's happening. And in this way, he says, as in the days of Noah. You will realize it's the last days. And it says, as in the days of Noah. It's because in those days, and in the days of Sodom and Gomorrah, they were carrying on with their wicked ways, and they had no idea destruction was coming. So they were just carrying on as normal. That's the way it's described. So let me actually read that to you now. Luke 17, 26 to 30, it said, "And just as it was written in the days of Noah, so will it be in the time of the Son of Man. People ate, they drank, they married, they were given in marriage, right up to the day when Noah went into the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all." See, right up to the day, he's just explaining it to you. Nobody had a clue. Right up to the day when Noah preached for 40 years, he was telling them. And still, nobody was preparing, nobody was putting away their sins, nobody was getting right, nobody was repenting. Same in Sodom and Gomorrah. They were up to their neck in just perversion and sexual immorality and violence and thievery and lies and deception. People ate, they drank, they married, they were given in marriage right up to the day when Noah went into the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. So it was the same as it was in the days of Lot. People ate, they drank, and they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. See, it's saying they're just carrying on with their lives, not knowing what's coming. But on the very day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. That is the way it will be on the day that the Son of Man is revealed. See? This is why it's important to read it for yourselves, people. That is the day that it will be on the day that the Son of Man is revealed. People aren't going to have a clue. Nobody knows the hour. Remember, you have to just add up all the sayings, like all the little hints and all the explanations. That is the way it will be on the day that the Son of Man is revealed. So it kind of explains the kind of push that you see what's happening today. They don't want people to get married. Because it said it here twice. That people were getting married. They don't want people partying and eating and drinking. But you know, people were getting married anyway. You can't stop that because it's money. And on that day, let him who is on the housetop with his belongings in the house not come down and go aside to carry them away like otherwise. And likewise, let him who is in the field not turn back. Remember Lot's wife? Whoever tries to preserve his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life will preserve and quicken it. I tell you, in that night there will be 2 men in one bed, and one will be taken and the other will be left. There will be 2 women grinding together. One will be taken and the other will be left. 2 men will be in the field. One will be taken and the other will be left. People think that's the rapture. Then they asked him, "Where, Lord?" He said to them, "Wherever the dead body is, there will the vultures and eagles be gathered together." People explain that as the rapture. But where? Where, Lord? They asked him, "Where?" He said to them, "Wherever the dead body is, there will the vultures and eagles be gathered together." Oh man, you see, because it's times like that, it's just going to be so serious, so serious. Like I said, Matthew 24:19, in those times, and even now, you don't want to be having babies. So I can totally understand why Christians, believers, aren't having kids, aren't getting married. Because we can't focus on these things. The single man seeks to please God. The married man seeks to please his wife. Matthew 24:19. Woe unto those who give suck. Meaning during these times you don't want to have a baby or a toddler. During times when you're fleeing, during these tribulation times, it's going to be a burden. It's going to be a liability, having a pregnant wife. 2 Esdras 16:44. Let those that are married be like those who won't have children. Let those who are married be like those who also are widowed. It's just like giving you tiny hints of like, let him who is in the field not sow, let him who reaps not sow. Don't be holding on to your business. You may need to leave your wife behind. You may need to walk away from your wife. And it's best not to have children in these times. Like, it's just telling you things. And I know you see on YouTube so many beautiful young sisters doing these videos about their kingdom spouses and stuff like that, and it's just like, look, yeah, it's exciting, but us guys, we can't think about that. We have to stay focused. We can't get carried away or floating up in the clouds with these things. Yeah, it's exciting. We can't wait to meet you as well. But you don't want no liabilities. And it's hard to explain. You just can't get sidetracked, make mistakes. I think you understand anyway. Like, I'll just, I don't want to say something. It's a lot. Like, it's something I think about a lot. And it's just, it's best to wait. It's best to wait anyway. Like I said previously, it's best to wait until we're all together. Then you know everybody's passed the test. These are the bloodlines of the second life. Everybody here has been approved. Because especially for us brothers, you know, women are used as weapons in war as well. As spies during pillow talk. Like history, come on, man. You read the books, you see it in throughout history. It just depends, like, if you've been paying attention, if you actually enjoy watching documentaries and researching these kind of things. Women can be very dangerous in times of espionage and you would hate to be attached to someone now and then they fall away at the last minute and they're handing you over. A man's enemies will be those of his own household. I just constantly thinking, okay, what does this look like in reality? What does it look like in this day and age? What's been done before? COINTELPRO. And you got these brothers out there saying, oh, as long as the guy's an Israelite, it doesn't matter what wife he takes, the child will still be Israel. And it's just like, be careful what you're saying, guys. Be careful what you're saying. Because that's not the point. That's not the point. I'm gonna make that point when I do Chronicles. I've missed reading the Bible out loud to you guys. I've missed bringing out the word, so I want to get this book finished and get back to the word because I've missed it. And I want to talk about Chronicles.